And I'm sure many of you who are watching us from home, from work, from wherever you are, you find that first aid comes in handy every now and then. So we're talking about first aid for domestic injuries. First aid for domestic injuries. And Dr. Roland Egan is here to take us through it. Good morning, Doc.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm blessed. Yourself?
I'm very well, thank you. Wonderful. So let's get into this conversation. A lot of the time, especially for people who have kids at home, you're constantly on the edge of your seat because you're hoping, oh, no, don't touch that. He'll cut himself, she'll fall. You're thinking about all these things. But every now and then, the unavoidable happens and the unfortunate happens and injuries happen in the home. Sometimes it's something as simple as cutting onions or chopping your meat for your pepper soup in the kitchen and then you get a cut. How do we deal with some of these injuries? That's what I want us to talk about. And I want us to start by talking about how some of these injuries affect children. Okay. And then how they affect adults, because I imagine that you address them differently. Okay, so let's start with that.
First of all, we should appreciate the fact that injuries do happen, like you rightly said, and domestic injuries are one of the things that are commonly happening in our environment. So to differentiate the type of injuries that happen in adults from children is very key, because there are certain things that come to play when we talk about injuries that happen to children, because even the body anatomy, how their body or their skin looks like, or how their skin is made up of, is a big contribution to the mechanism of the injury, how deep the injury would be, and even their healing process, how well they can recover from these injuries. So when it comes to differentiating between the adult and the child, we should also know that there are different types of injuries that will happen to them depending on what they are doing. But then they are all exposed equally to these injuries. When a child takes a knife and cuts the hand, blood will come, just as when an adult takes the knife and cuts himself or herself. So the recovery or the intensity of the injury might be different, but we are all equally exposed to all these kinds of injury. A child can be bent, an adult can also have a bend and all that.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the injuries. You just mentioned burns, and then we have scalds. Burns and scalds are different, right? Can you please explain the difference? So, because usually when something hot touches you and you're hurt, we say I'm burnt, but it's not the same thing, right?
So usually a scald would be as a result of maybe a steam or a vapor or a hot substance that is just passing on the skin. And you know, you have different layers of the skin. Maybe you go into that later on. But a burn involves almost the deep part of the tissues. So
we have some injuries, like some scalds that can happen, right? So you open the oven, some steam comes out. Hey, and if your face gets scalded, that's painful. Huh? Okay, that's another injury, so you're mopping. And I think we'll talk about some of these injuries later, but I want us to focus on the burns and the scalds first, right? Okay, so you're saying that scalds, it has to do with hot substances, all right, but usually when there's some wetness or some moisture, so vapor,
surface of the skin.
Okay, so if you are boiling your rice for your nwamo, and then you open the
I can see you like a lot of food.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely, I do. I do. So you open the pots, and then the steam comes out. We usually say I got burnt, but it means
it's a scald.
Oh, it's a scald. Okay. Interesting.
So that will be for the scald. But we should also know that there are degrees of burns, or to what extent is the person burnt. So what we should understand is that the skin is in layers. So we have what we call, it's divided actually into four layers. The skin is divided into 4 layers. We have the epidermis, which is the first covering of the skin, on which is where you have the hairs and the sweat glands.
What we touch all the time
is the first layer of the skin. Then when you go beneath it, we have the dermis. So it's more or less like epidermis. So the epi is the upper part. Then you come below it, which is the dermis. So there are certain forms of burns or degree of burn that will not penetrate from the dermis, from the epidermis. We just stay in the epidermis. We just stay in where we see. Will not penetrate to the dermis or even to the subcutaneous or even to the tissues underneath it. So these also bring in the differences in the degree of burn and how intense or how deep the injury is.
Okay. A lot of the time we hear things like, oh, she had a first degree burn, he had a third degree burn. What does that mean?
Okay, so a first degree burn is when the burn is restricted to only the dermis.
Okay.
Okay, it hasn't gone beneath the dermis. It's just on the surface.
So just the surface.
Yes.
Okay.
Then the second degree is when both the epidermis and the dermis are both affected.
Okay.
Please, you understand?
Yes.
And the third degree is when the dermis, the epidermis, and the subcutaneous is affected.
Okay.
The fourth degree is when all 4 layers, including some soft tissues and muscles, are also affected in that injury. So the practitioner, the medical practitioner, would have an eye to know, okay, this injury or this burn is only restricted to the dermis.
Okay.
It's only restricted to the epidermis. And on that basis is graded first, second, third, and fourth.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now you get a scald or a burn at home. I mean, you of course, you're not a medical practitioner, unless you're a doctor like you'll be able to know, but if you're a lay person, what do you do? What's the first thing you should do by way of first aid?
Okay, so just like you rightly said, there is something you can do first of all before you get to the hospital. That's the importance of our discussion today, first aid. It is not the ideal or optimum treatment, but then is what makes way for you to get to the hospital.
Okay.
So let me explain a little bit about first aid before we get into that one. So the aim of the first aid is, number one, to prevent the deterioration of the event.
Okay.
So you got bent, the substance can be there till you get to the hospital, and that can worsen the situation. So you would want to alleviate that kind of danger or remove that kind of worsening situation.
Okay.
So that's the importance of first aid, number one. Number two is to preserve the life. There is some petty things that we can do to preserve the life of the individual who maybe someone got choked.
Okay.
Then you can just do something little or dislodge whatever got choked in the throat of the person, and by so doing you save their life.
Okay.
The third thing for importance of the first aid is that it actually promotes the recovery or the healing of the person. So maybe it would have taken a long time for them to get to the hospital, but by those initial steps, you get to shorten the damage caused, and you also get to improve the rate at which when they receive the actual medical care, they will respond to it or recover in that regard. Okay. So back to the question you first asked, that's how relevant will be the first aid when someone gets a burn in the house, or what are some of the things that you would do?
Exactly.
So first of all, you separate or you remove the danger from the person.
Okay.
So maybe it was the steam or it was fire or whatever got the person burned. You remove it from there. So both yourself should be safe from the danger.
Okay.
You can't go and save someone from fire and get yourself
burnt
in the fire.
Well.
Yeah. So you make sure you are safe, number one, and number two, you also remove the offensive objects from the person.
Okay.
Number two is that you also make sure that the person is responding. Okay, there are some level of burns that you find the people unconscious and on the floor and all that. So you make sure they have life. So you can either tap them or call their name.
Okay.
So for example, oh, Roland, so that you know that, okay, when they got separated, they are still alive.
Okay.
Then you can, as a medical person, assess the person. But then, for example, you said you're in the house. So if you're in the house and you got bent, you would then put it under running water.
Okay.
Okay. Then when you
cold
allow
water.
yes, cold. Yeah. Okay. Not hot water. Yeah. So you can keep it under cold running water.
Okay.
But then you should also learn to control the pressure at which the water is coming. So when you open the tap, it shouldn't be at the highest.
At full force. Okay.
Or the full force.
What's the reason for that?
Because it can cause more injury.
Okay.
Water can be a strong force, so the person is already in pain, and some of these things, there will be blisters on the surface of the skin. When the pressures are high, it can break those blisters.
Okay.
And those blisters are actually protective, so that the skin will not be exposed to the environment.
Okay, so that's your body reacting
exactly
to the injury,
yes.
to
and
make
it's
sure
very
that
protective.
it doesn't become any worse.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I know most of us break them when they
Yes.
come, but it's very advisable that you allow them to break on their own.
Okay.
Because it's protecting you from the environment. And yeah, that is it for that.
For brands. So run under cold water. The pressure shouldn't be high.
Yes.
And then don't burst the blisters that
exactly.
form. Okay.
And you don't also have to put any concoction or local herbs or whatever substance on it, because water is enough to clean and cool down the temperature which is burning you.
Okay.
And then you can consult some medical help from other places as well. Also, you don't have to put some ointment, or because you don't even, depending on even the type of mechanism or whatever cause the burn, there are certain substances you should avoid. But then water is neutral and you can just keep.
Okay, and that's a very important point you're making, because a lot of the time when you get a burn or a scald, oh, let's go and get Vaseline, let's go and get this ointment, this burn ointment. But you're saying that depending on whether you're burnt by oil, you're scalded by water, any of those things, the substance you put on it can worsen it.
Yes.
Because it will react to whatever burnt you.
Exactly.
Very, very important.
Because you know, we have different how do you call it? For example, if the skin is exposed, if the epidermis is exposed, and you want to put an ointment on
so
that
if the epidermis is exposed, that's where you start seeing like a whitish
kind of thing. It's supposed to be pinkish, but then that's when you see the skin beneath it. Then you don't have to put maybe an ointment, something that has mint or has some irritating substance directly on the skin, because now you are worsening the case than doing a lot of good to the person. Okay,
so somebody just asked, how relevant is salt solution to a domestic injury at home? This is from Mabna and Dansuman.
So you know, salt is basic or alkaline, talking about the pH of the salt. So people have the idea that, oh, so far as there is something hot, it should be acidic. So in an attempt to neutralize that, they might put salt water on it. But the basic principle is that if you know that the solution or whatever is causing the burn is acidic, then your basic will work.
Right.
But you are not sure of the pH of whatever caused the injury. So your salt might not work or might work. So the ideal thing is that just put it under running water, and the water will just
so Mabna, stick to running water. Okay, so I want us to run through the things in the first aid box that you have here. So everybody should have a first aid box at home.
Ideally, yeah.
Okay, so let's run through the items that are in the box.
The first aid box is supposed to do I have to bring them out?
Yes, one by one, so that we can see them well.
Okay, so you are supposed to have a cotton in your first aid box. And you're supposed to have maybe a bandage in your first aid box. You're also supposed to have...
I see two different kinds of bandages.
Yes. So depending on what you want to do, you would use different kind of bandages. Yeah.
So what would the white one, for example, be used for?
So you use this beneath the wound. After you've cleaned it, you then use it beneath the wound. Then because you don't want, this is too light for the outside, so you use this on top of it. Or also if the person has a fracture or something, you use this to form a slap or a slit around the hand to secure the hand.
So you don't just get up and put any kind of bandage and walk around at different types.
So this is also an adhesive tape, what we call plaster. Then you have a scissors to cut your bandage or your gauze or your tissues, and also your...
So you shouldn't be cutting into their teeth.
That is very unprofessional because you can break your teeth out of that. And also you have to protect yourself whilst doing all of these things. So you have to put on a glove.
Because there's blood, all that.
Exactly. But you see, these ones are, how do you call it, disposable. So you can just dispose these ones off. And we have the ones that are also not disposable. These are sterile. So we call them the surgical ones. So when you are going to deal with wounds directly and you don't want to infest them, because this one I've touched everywhere. And going to touch the wound would transmit the infection to the wound. So ideally when you are going to dress the wound, but you see, this goes beyond the work of someone in the house. Exactly. So sometimes it's advisable that you just try to do the very basic ones, then consult your medical profession for this. Then we also have mentholated spirits.
Which has become our friend in COVID time.
Oh, okay. I don't know if I can talk about one recommendation.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so there is this company called Kofi Chrome Pharmacy Limited. They are making very good mentholated spirits.
Made in Ghana.
Made in Ghana, yes. So if you find yourself in Accra, wherever in Ghana you find yourself, you can get one Kofi Chrome mentholated spirit. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, then this is povidone iodine as well.
Okay.
Okay, then...
so the normal iodine we know?
No.
Oh, there's a difference?
Yes, povidone iodine is for cleaning the surface of the wound.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not the normal...
It's not the normal one.
So that people will go and take iodine test.
So that what some people call dress?
No.
No?
Yes.
So what do people call dress?
Maybe I've not heard it.
Maybe you've not heard it. Yeah, but a lot of people say dress. Okay, so povidone iodine.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you have your gentian violet and all of those things inside.
Okay, what's in the turquoise wrap?
These are gauze.
Okay, this is all gauze.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sterile gauze. Yeah.
Okay.
Then you can also have painkillers, antacids, because people have different types of injury. So the burn itself will cause pain to the person. So you can give them some painkillers to relieve them of the pain that they are going through. And all
okay. Let's talk very, very briefly about somebody falls in the house. Sometimes we say, okay, I've sprained my ankle, I've strained my ankle, all these words being thrown around. How do you treat something like that? How can you even tell whether it's a sprain or a strain or whatever it is?
So a sprain is simply a stretch of the muscle. And it's painful. Okay. Then when someone falls as well, one of the injuries that can happen is that they can break a limb, which is a fracture, a broken bone. So most at times when people fall, you might not know whether it's just a stretch of the muscle or an actual bone is broken. So you would want to make sure there is no bone broken or it's just a muscle stretch. So in other words, people would have to find out what has actually happened to the person, okay? And when you find out that the bone is broken, you have to make sure that you are handling the person with the extra carefulness, yes, because if you move them in a certain way and the bone moves and the alignment is not very good, the healing process can start and it will be stuck with them forever. Yeah.
Amputation may even set in and
maybe
all that.
In worst cases.
In worst cases.
So you have to be careful as to how you go about that. And you can also put a slap, you make a board. So for example, if the person broke the arm, you can make a board, maybe a cardboard or a very hard paper, put it at the back to support the arm. Then you can wrap your bandage around it. Then make a sling for them to hang their arm inside. Then you can take them to the hospital. Yeah.
Okay, and then lastly, very quick one. If there's a cut, how do you deal with that?
So if there is a cut, you go back to what I initially said. You keep it under running water. Okay. And there's this bad attitude of some of us that when you get a cut, you directly take it to your mouth to suck the blood or something. So I think it's one of the things that we should avoid. Yes. And when you want to stop the blood, one of the practical things you can do is to apply pressure, simple pressure on the limb or wherever the cut is. And with time, the bleeding will stop, depending on how severe it is.
What if the bleeding doesn't stop?
It will stop. When you apply enough pressure, it might not stop totally.
Completely.
But then there is a level of reduction that can buy you time and space to transport the person to the hospital.
Okay, so bottom line, we should always end up in the hospital.
Exactly.
Because you don't really know what has happened.
Because first aid is not treatment in itself.
Okay. Yeah. We have a message here. Someone says, "Good morning, City TV. Please, can you use hand sanitizer in place of spirit when you have a bruise or a cut?" That's from Peter and Boku.
No, you can't. Okay. Because it has other substances in it. But we have pure alcohol rub that you can use it, or this mentholated spirit that you can use. Yeah.
Okay. And then another message from Miriam in Kaswa. She says, "How effective are gentian violets to wounds at home?"
Yes, very, very effective because they have protective, how do you call it, ingredients or things that can protect the skin against infection. And also when you put the gentian violet, it has a way of stopping the bleeding. And also it has maybe some antibiotic properties that will help protect you as well.
Okay. So, Doc, final words in 10 seconds.
So what we should do is that all of us should get at least some form of knowledge about first aid, and also get abreast with the fact that when you get these kind of injuries, we can save the life or preserve the life before taking them to the hospital, and let us all keep safe as well.
Okay, wonderful. So ladies and gentlemen, you've been hearing me speak and watching me speak to Dr. Roland Egan. He's the doctor in charge at the Healing Hands Wound Care Center. They specialize in wounds, and he's telling us today that first aid is only meant to make sure that the situation doesn't get worse. Basically, always make sure that no matter how small the injury looks, you end up in a hospital or a clinic or see some kind of healthcare provider, so that you make sure that it's no more serious than you actually think it is, and you don't have complications later on. So, I mean, we've been a very interesting conversation. I think that you should make sure that you take it seriously, because our healthcare maintenance in this country is very, very poor. We don't pay attention to some of these things. So please, please, please take it seriously and get a first aid box in your home.